Today, we bring you the account of a night in a small-town diner that nobody saw coming, a night that involved none other than Hollywood star Keanu Reeves. Buckle up, because this is going to be an unforgettable ride. Where are you watching from? Share in the comments below, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. Welcome to Motivation for Success, where we bring you unforgettable moments of kindness, resilience, and inspiration. Be sure to share and like this story as we dive into the incredible events of that evening. Get ready, because the story you're about to hear will take you on a journey through heartbreak and perseverance, through quiet gestures and profound transformations. The sign above the diner buzzed like a persistent mosquito, throwing flashes of pink and green onto the wet pavement. It was an unseasonably cold November evening, the kind that made people tuck their chins into their scarves and rush for any available source of warmth. Snow had yet to fall, but there was a subtle promise of it in the air, a crispness that made you suspect that by morning, a thin sheet of white might cover the ground. A lone customer sat by the window, tracing the edge of his coffee cup. His eyes, gentle, observant, alternated between the steam rising from the drink and the pages of the leather-bound diary resting next to his elbow. He was wearing a light-colored pullover. To all the world, he looked like a tired tourist or perhaps a man passing through town in search of solitude. Yet, there was something undeniably magnetic about him. Though his attire wasn't fancy, the aura he exuded was one of quiet confidence. He had no entourage, no flashy car parked out front. But if you were to look closely, you might recognize the face that had adorned countless movie screens, from action blockbusters to poignant indie films. Because that unassuming figure in the corner booth was Keanu Reeves. A few diners paid him little mind, they were busy cutting into burgers, slurping milkshakes, or checking their phones. Others raised an eyebrow in curiosity but chose to respect what appeared to be a man who wanted a moment of peace. The warm overhead lights hummed, the checkered tiles reflected the flickering neon sign, and a few muffled country songs played from a jukebox in the corner. It was an ordinary evening in a place known for being unremarkable, until two off-duty policemen walked in. Officer Mitchell and Officer Rourke were friends both on and off the clock. Tonight, they were out of uniform, wearing jeans and jackets instead of their usual navy blue attire, though their police badges hung visibly on their belts, a habit they never quite broke. As they pushed open the diner door, a draft of cold air whooshed in, carrying the tang of the oncoming winter. They laughed as they entered, their footsteps echoing across the tile floor. After a day spent dealing with parking infractions and petty theft, the two men were ready for a hot meal and some light-hearted banter. They scanned the diner, searching for a comfortable place to seat themselves. That was when Officer Mitchell nudged his partner, eyes narrowing in on Keanu at the far end. "Hey," he muttered, leaning closer to Rourke's ear, "does that guy look familiar to you?" Rourke peered at the man in the pullover for a moment, his brow furrowing. "Almost like. Nah, can't be. Looks like he's been shopping at a thrift store," he said, his casual cynicism serving as a cheap laugh for them both. Their voices were loud enough to carry across the small dining area. Keanu, hearing them, looked up, offered a soft, polite smile, and then lowered his gaze back to his journal. He turned a page. Outside, a car drove by, headlights illuminating the windows for the briefest moment. Inside, the two policemen shared a conspiratorial grin. Truth be told, Keanu's journal was not brimming with the details of a new script, nor was it filled with doodles of Hollywood sets. Instead, its lines contained reflections, snippets of gratitude, memories that were too precious to let slip into oblivion, and the sort of private thoughts a person might only confess to themselves. On the table next to it, partly obscured by the coffee cup, lay a folded piece of paper with slightly frayed edges, the vivid color of childlike doodles peeking out. As Officer Mitchell and Officer Rourke walked closer, a tense hush fell over the diner. Even the clank of silverware on plates seemed to grow quieter. The few other patrons, sensing something might happen, paused mid-bite, turning their attention toward the corner table. "Hey, buddy, Officer Mitchell said in a voice laced with sarcastic over-friendliness. He rested a hand on Keanu's table. "Big plans tonight, or are you just reminiscing about your glory days?" Rourke, following his partner's lead, gestured vaguely at the open journal. "Writing anything interesting in there? Maybe a script for your next box office flop?" Keanu looked up again, his expression composed, eyes quietly assessing the two men. He could have fired back with a cutting remark or simply announced who he was in a way that would silence them immediately. But that wasn't how he operated. Instead, he offered an almost imperceptible shrug, turned a page, and said nothing. This reaction unnerved the officers. They'd expected some kind of retort, some indignant outburst. Instead, they were met with a silence so calm it magnified their own insecurities. Rourke's gaze shifted from Keanu's face to the piece of folded paper lying atop the journal. Curious, he leaned in for a closer look. At first glance, the piece of paper appeared to be a child's drawing, vibrant swirls of color, stick figures sporting big, lopsided smiles, and a rainbow arching overhead. But the words scrawled in the center demanded attention. In clumsy, bright marker, it read, "Thank you for being my hero, Uncle Keanu. Love, Emily." Surrounding the words were hearts, flowers, and two stick figures, one small, labeled Emily, and a taller one labeled Uncle K. A large sun, complete with smiling rays, shone in the corner. And, in a child's blocky handwriting, it said, "Best day ever." Rourke felt a strange, uncomfortable twinge in his chest. Suddenly, the mocking tone he'd worn like a shield slipped from his face. He straightened, looking at Keanu more closely, and realized that the man before him wasn't a drifting has-been, he was someone who clearly mattered to a child out there. The dynamic between them had changed in an instant, and Mitchell, too, felt his bravado crumble. "Sorry, man," Mitchell mumbled, withdrawing his hand from the table. "We didn't mean to." Keanu merely nodded, eyes forgiving. He closed his journal, slipped the drawing inside it, and reached into his pocket to pull out a few crisp bills. Laying them on the table as a tip, he stood up. He offered the officers a polite nod, then walked past them, the bell above the diner door jingling softly as he left. That night might have seemed like just another passing moment in Keanu's life, another instance where he encountered people who misunderstood him. But in truth, his calm reaction was shaped by the deep reservoir of experiences he carried with him, experiences marked by heartbreak, responsibility, and acts of extraordinary compassion. Before the world knew him as the iconic star who performed jaw-dropping stunts and portrayed legendary characters, Keanu was simply a man who had known loss intimately. He had always been sensitive to the fleeting nature of life. But it was a different kind of heartbreak, one that involved a young girl named Emily and her father, David, that fundamentally transformed his perspective. Reconnecting with David. David was not just any acquaintance but an old friend from Keanu's earliest days in Los Angeles. They had met when Keanu was still an aspiring actor, juggling auditions, small gigs, and doubts about whether he'd ever make it in the competitive world of film. David, a friendly but reserved soul, was studying to become a social worker. Their paths converged through volunteer work at a local community center, where they discovered a mutual passion for helping others. However, as sometimes happens with friendships, time and distance pulled them apart. Keanu's career took off, catapulting him into a world of movie sets, interviews, and red carpets. David found himself in a small suburban neighborhood, engaged to a gentle woman named Alicia. They had Emily not too long after, and David embraced fatherhood with open arms. But tragedy struck. Alicia passed away suddenly when Emily was just a toddler. Years went by without Keanu and David crossing paths. Keanu, juggling his own personal losses and the whirlwind of fame, heard bits and pieces about David's struggles. Eventually, as life's pressures led Keanu to seek out quieter spaces and old connections, he found David again. By that time, David was a single father who hardly had time to mourn properly between looking after his daughter and holding down a demanding job. He had circles under his eyes, a perpetual weariness in his posture. Keanu was moved by David's situation. The sight of his old friend struggling to keep afloat stirred a fierce protective instinct. At first, Keanu's visits were simple check-ins, dropping off groceries, bringing a few toys for Emily, perhaps cooking them dinner once in a while. He didn't intend to stick around for too long, thinking he'd only be a temporary support until David got back on his feet. But Emily, then 6 years old, changed all that. She had a way of peering curiously at Keanu with those big, solemn eyes that seemed to say, "Who are you, and how long are you staying?" She was shy at first, speaking in short, breathless words. Yet, Keanu noticed a spark in her, an imagination that soared beyond the gray routine of her father's daily grind. One afternoon, Emily quietly tugged at Keanu's sleeve. She led him into the small living room and pointed at a plastic bin overflowing with crayons, colored pencils, and half-finished sketches. Timidly, she invited him to draw with her. So, Keanu sat on the floor, cross-legged, picking up a sheet of blank paper. He asked Emily what she wanted to create. "Anything," she whispered, and thus began a whimsical world of swirling colors, stick figure knights, dancing princesses, and large fire-breathing dragons. It was the first time Keanu had smiled so widely in ages. It felt like a rediscovery of the simple joys he had lost sight of amid the chaos of Hollywood. From that day on, Emily called him Uncle K, a title that warmed him more than any professional accolade ever could. The starstruck wonder many people had for him was absent in Emily. She saw him as the man who knelt down at her eye level, who listened attentively to her stories, and who never minded making a mess on the living room carpet if it meant they could build an epic cushion for it. Tragedy, however, was not done testing this small family. As if losing Alicia wasn't enough, David began to experience bouts of severe illness, migraines, sudden spells of weakness, unexplained pains. Keanu urged him to see a doctor, sensing that these weren't mere symptoms of stress. After a battery of tests, David received a devastating diagnosis, a rare and aggressive disease. What followed were months of hospital visits, nights spent in waiting rooms, and tears shed in silent corridors. David fought valiantly, and Keanu was beside him at every turn. He sat through the chemo treatments, did grocery runs when David was too weak to cook, and reassured Emily that her father's love for her was unyielding, even though he might look frail and tired. During these dark days, Emily took refuge in her art. She drew pictures of her father in superhero costumes, brandishing shields against invisible enemies. And she drew pictures of her Uncle K, pictures that showed him with big, comforting arms, always ready to pick her up if she fell. But David's condition worsened. The doctors tried everything, but the disease was relentless. After a year of painful treatments, and with heartbreak in his eyes, David passed away, leaving 9-year-old Emily all alone in the world, except for one man who could not bear the thought of her living without a stable, loving home, Keanu. One morning, soon after David's funeral, Keanu found himself sitting across from a social worker in a sterile office. Paperwork was piled high on the desk between them, a daunting labyrinth of legalities. He felt a weight in his chest he hadn't experienced since his own family tragedies. No matter what the law said, no matter what external logic dictated, Keanu was resolved. Emily would not enter the foster care system if he could help it. His fame offered some advantages. He had resources that could expedite certain processes, lawyers who could ensure that everything was handled correctly. But none of that overshadowed the emotional commitment he was making. Being someone's guardian was not a small responsibility. It meant forging an unbreakable bond that would encompass the mundane and the profound, homework checks, grocery shopping, and bedtime stories, yes, but also deeper emotional support in the face of nightmares and lonely heartbreak. During the first few weeks after David's passing, Emily was quiet, watchful, as though testing whether Keanu's presence was temporary or permanent. She had lost her mother, and now her father, and the idea of relying on another adult might have felt dangerous. Would he abandon her too? But Keanu never wavered. He came into her room each morning with a gentle knock, a tray holding hot cocoa, scrambled eggs, and a shy smile. He assured her that even though life felt like an endless storm, there were still sunlit days ahead. And Emily, moved by his unwavering presence, slowly but surely let down her guard. Setting up a home for Emily proved to be a learning experience for Keanu. Suddenly, the walls of his stylish apartment were adorned with unicorn posters and watercolors of flowers, courtesy of Emily's art supplies. She didn't ask for much, and her shy gratitude made Keanu's heart ache with tenderness. He purchased a soft, plush rug for her room, installed a small desk by a window that overlooked the city skyline, and stocked the shelves with every kind of art tool imaginable. Mornings became a tangle of hairbrushes and missing shoes, with Keanu discovering that taming a little girl's hair was a bigger challenge than dodging bullets in a blockbuster action film. But they laughed together through the tangles and tears, turning a frustrating moment into a bonding experience. Even the simple act of preparing her school lunch was an opportunity for small notes of encouragement. Emily, still grappling with her grief, often found solace in these small gestures of routine and normalcy. A particular memory stood out. One night, Keanu burned dinner so thoroughly that the fire alarm blared. Emily panicked, thinking a real fire had broken out, and Keanu had to rush her out of the apartment. Once the smoke cleared and the firefighters left, shaking their heads and smiling at the superstar's domestic mishap, the two ended up sitting on the living room floor, munching on takeout pizza. A piece of burnt lasagna sat forlornly on the kitchen counter, but they laughed at the absurdity of it all. In that laughter, a father-daughter dynamic bloomed, a bond stronger than any mistakes or uncertainties. Emily's 12th birthday was a milestone that both she and Keanu approached with a mix of excitement and trepidation. It was the first birthday she would celebrate without her father's reassuring presence. Determined to make it special, Keanu organized a small gathering of Emily's closest friends from school. He decorated the living room with brightly colored streamers, balloons, and a banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Emily," in large, sparkling letters. A homemade chocolate cake, yes, he tried baking again, though this time he enlisted help to avoid another fiasco, took center stage on the dining table. Emily, wearing a lavender dress, opened presents that ranged from art supplies to a unicorn-themed backpack. Each gift drew exclamations of delight from the wide-eyed preteen, but when she arrived at the final box, she hesitated, glancing curiously at Keanu. Inside that last box was a framed photo of her father, David, hugging her in the park, both of them radiant with laughter. The picture was placed beside a small plush toy of a dragon, one that she and her dad had picked out together during a happier time. Emily's eyes welled with tears, but they were tears of gratitude, not despair. She whispered a soft, "Thank you," hugging the frame to her chest. After the guests left and the apartment quieted down, Emily approached Keanu. With trembling hands, she offered him a folded piece of paper, the edges crinkled, as though she'd been holding onto it for days. "For you," she said. Keanu unfolded the paper. In neat handwriting, Emily had written, "Thank you for showing me what love is." A stick figure drawing of the two of them stood beneath the words, arms intertwined, with a rainbow arching over their heads. His breath caught. The message, though simple, carried a depth that resonated in his heart. He knelt down, wrapping his arms around her. She didn't flinch or pull away. They remained like that for a long moment, each drawing strength from the other. From that day on, Keanu carried Emily's note with him wherever he went, tucked safely into the pages of his journal. Just as their life began to settle into a steady rhythm, school projects, movie nights, walks in the park, fate took another cruel turn. Emily, now a bright 13-year-old, started complaining of frequent fatigue and unexplained aches. Initially, Keanu assumed it was the typical strain of growing up, combined with lingering emotional stress. But when she fainted one afternoon in art class, alarm bells rang. A whirlwind of medical consultations and hospital tests followed. Keanu found himself back in those sterile hallways he had come to know all too well when caring for David. The doctors delivered news that knocked the wind out of him. Emily had developed a serious illness, one that would require an aggressive treatment plan of chemotherapy, radiation, and potential surgeries. Keanu's resolve hardened. He vowed to stay by her side through every test, every needle prick, and every sleepless night. He cleared his schedule, stepped back from movie roles, and turned down countless interviews. To the outside world, it might have seemed like he was vanishing from the public eye, but in truth, he was reappearing in the only world that mattered, Emily's. The hospital became a second home, its corridors filled with hushed footsteps and the beeping of monitors. Emily faced her treatments with a bravery that belied her age, though there were moments when despair seeped into her voice. Keanu, refusing to let her see how terrified he was, peppered her days with small joys, funny stories from film sets, silly jokes, and surprise visits from therapy dogs. At night, when the exhaustion weighed heavily on both of them, he would sit by her bed, holding her hand. Sometimes, she would wake up crying, haunted by nightmares of losing everyone she loved. Keanu would gently smooth her hair and remind her that she was not alone. He brought her sketchbooks, brushes, and watercolor paints, transforming the white walls of her room with bursts of color. Despite the hospital's grim atmosphere, they found pockets of happiness. Keanu shared stories of his own misadventures, of comedic mishaps on film sets, of times he got lost in foreign cities while traveling. He wanted her to remember that life was more than a hospital bed, that the world still held wonders waiting for her. Emily, for her part, continued to draw. She made portraits of the nurses who cared for her, of the doctors who offered her hope, and of Keanu, always standing tall, always by her side. Even though she occasionally struggled to lift a pencil, her art bristled with a determination to capture every sliver of beauty she encountered. When Emily finally dozed off each night, Keanu would slip away to a quiet corner of the hospital lounge. There, armed with a laptop and a box of tissues, he meticulously compiled a scrapbook of sorts, a physical testament to the life they had built together. He gathered photographs, Emily's first day of school with him, that laughable attempt at homemade lasagna, birthdays, random selfies. He collected her drawings, from the earliest crayon doodles to her more recent watercolor masterpieces. He titled the book Bright Star, a nod to the light Emily brought into his life. On one of the final pages, he wrote a simple but powerful dedication, "To my bright star, Emily. You have taught me the true meaning of love and courage. No matter where life takes us, you will always be with me. Love, Uncle K." Some nights, the weight of it all was almost too much to bear. Keanu would find himself swallowing back tears, remembering the times he had prayed for David to pull through, and now here he was, praying the same prayers for Emily. Yet, he refused to let despair take over. One particularly stormy evening, rain slashed against the hospital windows, and thunder rumbled in the distance. The lights flickered intermittently, reflecting Emily's waning energy. She asked for her sketchbook, her voice weak but her spirit still aflame. Keanu helped her prop herself up, and she spent the next hour in concentrated silence, pencil scratching softly against paper. When she finished, her hands shook from fatigue, but she managed a smile. She handed the page to Keanu. It was a portrait of him, drawn with meticulous care, his face bathed in a halo of light. Underneath, she had written the words he would carry in his heart forever, "Thank you for being my hero." Tears clouded his vision as he hugged her gently. "No, Emily," he whispered, voice trembling with emotion, "you're my hero." In the hours that followed, the storm raged on, drenching the city in a cold downpour. But inside Emily's hospital room, a different kind of storm was nearing its end. Emily's breathing grew shallow, her heartbeat slowed. In the early hours of the morning, as Keanu held her hand and whispered affirmations of love and gratitude, Emily took her last, soft breath. The subsequent days felt unreal. The corridors that had become a familiar battleground emptied of life. Doctors and nurses offered condolences, but their words echoed in a numbed silence. Keanu's grief was a heavy burden, yet he also felt a strange sense of peace. Emily's final weeks had been filled with love, art, and defiance in the face of her illness. And if her story had to end, it ended in the arms of someone who cherished her completely. He organized a small memorial, just close friends and the few nurses who had grown fond of Emily. Flowers lined the altar, alongside a display of her artwork, images of unicorns, her father, and, of course, her Uncle Kay. People cried openly, some overwhelmed by the beauty and tragedy intertwined in Emily's short life. When it was time to speak, Keanu recounted how Emily loved to doodle in bright colors, how she believed that even the darkest nights could be illuminated by a single spark of kindness. Determined to keep Emily's memory alive, Keanu went ahead and published Bright Star, the scrapbook-turned-book that detailed their journey. The foreword explained who Emily was, a courageous girl with an unbreakable spirit, and how she had taught him lessons that transcended fame or fortune. The book gained traction, not because of Keanu's celebrity status, but because of the poignant humanity woven through its pages. Letters began pouring in from readers across the globe, grieving parents, children battling illnesses, and individuals who found hope in the face of suffering. They thanked Keanu for sharing Emily's story, for reminding them that love endures beyond heartbreak, that one child's spirit could become a beacon for countless others. And that brings us back to the quiet diner on that chilly November evening. Keanu, older and perhaps wiser, carried Emily's drawing, the one she'd gifted him on her 12th birthday, tucked into the pages of his journal. He kept it not as a memento of sorrow, but as a testament to the enduring power of love and resilience. What the policeman witnessed that night was merely the tip of an iceberg of heartache, courage, and unwavering devotion. Keanu's silence in the face of their mockery wasn't a sign of weakness, it was the calm that arises from understanding life's true battles, those fought in hospital rooms and sleepless nights, those that decide whether a child grows up feeling loved or abandoned. As he left the diner, the brisk wind slapped his cheeks, but he felt oddly warm inside. In his pocket, the worn piece of paper bearing Emily's words, "Thank you for being my hero, Uncle Keanu. Love, Emily," remained a steady pulse against his heart. In the years since Emily's passing, Keanu has continued to honor her memory in quiet ways. Every year on her birthday, he donates art supplies to children's hospitals, hoping to ignite in other young souls the same spark that once lit up Emily's eyes. He visits pediatric wards, not for public relations or media coverage, but to share a few hours drawing silly doodles or reading storybooks. In his private moments, he still talks to Emily in his heart, sharing with her the day's small victories or challenges, as though she's just in the other room. One day, he found a meadow out in the countryside, a place where cherry blossoms bloomed in spring, painting the landscape in soft pink petals. Tucked beneath one of these cherry trees is a small plaque that reads, "Family is who you hold on to when the world lets go." It's a quote from Emily's diaries, a line she once wrote while grappling with grief. The plaque is a modest tribute, but it holds profound meaning. Anyone who stumbles upon it might never guess who placed it there or why. But to Keanu, it's a sanctuary, a spot where he can sit, close his eyes, and imagine Emily's laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves in the wind. In the grand tapestry of life, fame and fortune often appear as shining threads, but they can't mend a broken heart or bring back loved ones lost. Keanu's life story demonstrates that real heroism isn't about being on the cover of magazines, it's about small acts of care, about staying when things get messy, about loving someone so deeply that you're willing to face unspeakable sorrow to bring them comfort. That night in the diner, the officers witnessed a fraction of Keanu's truth. They saw him as a man carrying a child's note, an emblem of both tragedy and triumph. And though they may have initially approached him with ridicule, they left with humility, reminded that everyone carries battles unseen. If you ever encounter a piece of art by a child, maybe a crayon drawing, a finger painting, or a clay sculpture, remember Emily. Remember that behind every youthful creation lies a story, a hope, or a sorrow that might be invisible at first glance. To dismiss it is to dismiss the beating heart of innocence and perseverance. In the quiet of the night, when the world feels overwhelming, we can find solace in stories like Emily's, stories that remind us of the resilience and love we each hold within. Keanu's journey from an unassuming diner patron to the hero of a young girl's heart isn't just a tale of celebrity kindness, it's a universal reminder that we can all do better for those who depend on us, that we can all choose empathy over judgment. Emily may no longer walk among us, but her essence glows on in every life touched by bright star, in every child who picks up a paintbrush instead of succumbing to despair, and in every adult who sees that true family transcends blood ties. When you feel lost or alone, recall this story. A young girl named Emily believed in a love so strong that even the cold sting of loss could not extinguish it. And a man named Keanu Reeves, world-famous actor yet humble soul, rose above his own sorrow to be her guardian angel here on earth. Through heartbreak and healing, through storms literal and metaphorical, their bond remained unbreakable, bound by compassion and sealed by a drawing that read, "Thank you for being my hero, Uncle Keanu." That's the power of love, my friends. Even when faced with unimaginable loss, we can find hope in our shared humanity. Let Emily's story, and Keanu's unwavering devotion, inspire you to open your heart, to be a light for someone who needs it, or to hold on to the precious people in your life a little tighter tonight. If this story moved you, consider sharing it with someone who might need encouragement. And don't forget to drop a comment below. Let us know your thoughts, your reactions, or any similar experiences you've had. We'd love to hear from you. Remember to hit that subscribe button and join our Motivation for Success community for more inspiring narratives that spotlight the extraordinary kindness and courage that can be found in everyday life. Together, let's continue to celebrate the strength of the human spirit. Until next time, take care, stay hopeful, and keep shining your own light in the world.